Recording now, and then we'll get going. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to today's session, which is called Building Diverse Teams, Strategies for Success. I'm here with Vince Snoddy from PharmiWeb and the team from SGI, and today we're going to go through quite a journey on what people can do to improve their DE&I focus within their own organizations. So a couple of housekeeping things first and foremost. As you can probably see, the meeting is being recorded. If you'd like a copy of the recording at the end, you can reach out to us on sales@PharmiWeb.com and I'll get that sent over to you along with any other resources that you need. There is a chat function, so if you have a question that you'd like to ask the panel, don't be shy, just pop it in there and I'll ask it later when we get to the Q&A at the end of the session. In that case, I think that's just about everything. So Vince, I'll pass over to you to get started.
Lovely, thanks Simon. So welcome everybody to today's session. D&I generally across the board has been a high priority for a number of companies over the last 18 months, in actual fact, more than anything else. And we're going to be doing a range of webinars this year around this and a number of other key points. I wanted to start by introducing the SGI team, which we'll do as we go along. But again, as with Simon, if you can keep any messages or questions put in the chat, that would be really useful, just as a reminder. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at who we are. So I'm the Managing Director of PharmiWeb. We're on our 25 years this year. This is the number one of 12 webinars we're doing this year. I'm going to try and do them all in this same sort of style, more like a question time event. So we get some real people talking to you about what's going on in the market. And Simon, a little introduction from yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I've been with PharmiWeb now for about 4.5 years. We've been doing the webinars now for near on 3 years, so we're well into this now. Looking forward to today and looking forward to a great session.
Okay, thanks Simon. Okay, so let's start with introducing the team. So let's start with Nick. A little bit from you, Nick, if you don't mind.
Thanks very much, Vince and Simon, for having us today. My name is Nick Gatenby. I am Performance Director with SGI. So essentially what that means is I've got a heavy slant towards learning and development and cultural engagement on the people side. I've been with the business for over 4 years, working with the team on both how we drive diversity internally, but also how we support our clients externally in driving that diversity and inclusion across the recruitment that we do. I also have a focus on creating the employee voice forums within SGI and ensuring that the diversity is a part of our business as much as anything else. So keep that nice and simple at that stage, but thank you very much for having us.
Hey, lovely. Thanks very much there, Nick. Okay, and then moving on to Michael. Can you give us the same sort of overview about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. So Michael Belsko, I'm the Associate Director at SGI for our DAC perm teams, so Germany and Switzerland predominantly. I've been in the industry now for approximately 15 years, actually. 2 years with SGI now, just over. But I've been lucky enough to experience small teams scaling from 0 heads to 22 and managing teams throughout that entire 15 years. Essentially started my leadership journey around 7-8 years ago now. So hopefully I can really provide some good insights into D&I.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Michael. That's been brilliant. And then moving on, if I can, to Rebecca. A little bit about yourself, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm the head of marketing at SGI, coming up to 5 years in the company on Monday. And I've got overall 7 years of recruitment marketing experience. And my role, particularly over the last few years, has been very much looking at our brand and how we unite that with technology and how we use technology to build efficiencies across recruitment marketing. You can see on the slide here, I've got quite involvement in quite a few different areas too, alongside Nick and Michael, and really looking forward to getting through this webinar today.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I'm going to leave you guys up on screen so people know who you are. And the way I normally like to run these is to ask you some of the questions that have come in already. We've already got a couple of questions to ask you at the end that have come in from the audience. But really just to sort of set the scene. So when we're looking at building and championing inclusive hiring practices, there are a number of questions around that. And Nick, I wanted to ask you this one, if I may. So what strategies can you employ to identify and mitigate biases in the hiring process?
Okay, I'm going to try and break that down into two parts, because I think it really is two parts. It's identifying it and then mitigating it separately. I think when it comes to identifying it, one of the things we often automatically go to, whether we're talent or HR, is to go and look at the data. And the data is important. The problem often comes about if the data itself is biased. What I mean by that is if a business hasn't decided what the characteristics are that they're looking for, whether that be the skills characteristics or the framework they use as a business in terms of the type of culture that they're looking for, then they aren't really assessing against anything. All they're assessing against is the talent pool diverse in its nature. So I think that's the first thing I'd have a look at, is actually, do we as a business know what our criteria is by which we're selecting? And obviously, if there's glaring bias in that itself, then that's something you need to have a look at. The second thing would be then, is the current characteristics and criteria giving us the results out? And I wouldn't necessarily just look at the outcomes from that. I'd look at the talent pool that you're receiving. If you're sending out, whether that's through your job descriptions or your engagement, if you've got an internal talent acquisition team that is directly approaching candidates, information about the business that is attracting only a certain talent pool, that's something that you want to have a look at. So it's about the talent pool coming into the interview process. The way that you're screening through that process, is that picking up on a certain type of bias that's leading to a different outcome at the other side, but also the candidates that are dropping out of that process. And I would say that's one of the ones that we tend not to look at. We tend to look at where are we screening out, but actually some of that bias might be the way in which interviewers are presenting the opportunity. Is the opportunity itself actually going to entice somebody from a diverse background, or maybe somebody who doesn't have necessarily the want to work full time? Maybe there's something from a neurodivergent perspective in the way that we're advertising, or the way that we're presenting data, or even the interview process itself. And I think looking through that, we often forget to go back for feedback from candidates in the process that maybe choose not to join the business, and ask, what was it that initially made you choose not to carry on through that process? So that's certainly an area I'd look at. There are lots of tools, and every different business uses different TA products or HR data to present to them. And I think that's really useful. I think the key thing, as I said, is understand the criteria and understand if it's creating the results you want at the end. Is it testing, and is the data showing you that it's testing the right elements? In terms of mitigation, I think there's a couple of things I'd say. One, if you took the profiles through the process that are creating that result, and you did a blind hiring process in terms of with your hiring managers, are you getting the same results? When I talk about a blind hiring process, I know many of you will know what I'm talking about here. It's removing the key characteristics that might create some sort of bias from that CV, from that candidate's profile, putting it back in front and seeing if the interview would happen in the first place. But then also having a look at that through the interview process itself. And in terms of mitigating that, it tends to happen with bias that we're doing it because one of a few things is happening. Either it's lack of knowledge, or it's lack of education in how to manage that and remove that. We all have that unconscious bias. We can't help it. We have preconceived ideas, unintentional or intentional, obviously one being worse than the other. But it's about making sure that there are double checks with that. So I would drive, in terms of mitigating it, education, one, with hiring managers, with internal recruiters about how we do it. But two, I'd really challenge people to make sure that there is a doubling down in interviews, so that there's two people in an interview, if possible, at any one stage, so that that feedback is regular. Often what happens is we end up looking retrospectively at processes about bias, but actually when you have two people really clear on the criteria of assessment, if that criteria is not being used and bias is coming into the equation, that other person can provide that feedback and challenge that person on that bias as it happens in the moment. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we miss out on. Beyond that, for me, I think the final bit just comes down to actually making sure that your interview process does test those characteristics. What's the process? And I think having that double down helps, but also it's about driving the engagement in the way that we make those interview processes work. So if we have an interview process, quite often managers, team builders will go and have those interviews. HR or talent acquisition have driven through an interview process, but it's kind of not half done. And we've got to make sure that they understand and are engaged in those characteristics being the priority, and business partnering with them to make sure that those processes work, not just once, twice, but on an ongoing basis. And I think business partnering is really the key for successful mitigation of bias over a long period of time, which also will catch the continuous mitigation of that process.
Okay, that's a really good answer, actually. I mean, we've had, even with our side, when we're talking to a lot of clients about their employer branding, how they get their messaging out, one of the things that always comes back is one of the issues with hiring managers really not being trained properly to actually deal with these things, believe it or not. And last year, was it 9% of people left companies due to lack of recognition or poor management? And again, same issues. So I think you're spot on there.
100%. And I think the biggest challenge with that is we have to recognize that everybody does have unconscious bias, and it's understanding, as you say, in a leadership role, where is my unconscious bias coming into this? And I'm not necessarily talking about being intentionally prejudiced, but just simply historical experience makes us react in a certain way to certain scenarios, and teaching people to, one, acknowledge it, and two, react in a way that they're actually focusing on what's important and not that bias.
Okay, great. Well, look, I'd love to carry that one on, in actual fact, but we've got to move on because I've got quite a few questions here that I want to ask you guys. So I'm going to put this out to Rebecca, if I may. In what ways can you leverage technology to support inclusive hiring practices? Because I know that you cover the technology side on your business. So what's your view on that?
Thank you. Oh, this kind of follows really nicely on from Nick's answer. And technology, there's obviously so many different kind of components to it, and we could continue talking about it for all day. I'm going to focus in on a few certain areas. So I guess the main one would be AI. We're constantly hearing AI being dropped in every conversation and everything that we're doing at the moment. But utilising AI platforms to, number one, create job descriptions, or at least assist creating job descriptions, can remove that element of bias within that writing. And then number two, for AI, you can of course use it to create that initial candidate screening process. Tools that we've been familiar with ourselves at SGI, a platform called Get Optimal, which is really powerful if you're looking to use AI to generate a diverse shortlist of candidates. And we also have managed to produce a AI tool that is built into our CRM. Again, that helps us with the advertising process. The most important thing to remember with any AI or machine learning, though, is that you have to educate the platform, that it is always built and always based on the user and the directions that the user is giving the AI in order to build its knowledge and to provide the answer for you. Second area I'd kind of want to jump in on is chatbots. So I listened to a podcast recently on CIPD, and it was about the interview process, about the candidate screening process. And actually the guests on the podcasts highlighted around bias and how everyone has bias within them, even though we are working towards removing that. And their suggestions or recommendations was to remove the phone call in part of the initial screening process, because jumping on the phone, we've traditionally always said, jump on the phone with the candidate or potential applicant and get that conversation going. But you're already creating a step of bias there. So taking it back to chatbots, by having chatbots introduced within your hiring process as that initial point in screening, you can deliver the standardized questions. They can assess the applicants or the candidates via their qualifications and skills, and you can remove that potential level of bias that you could potentially introduce early on in the funnel. A list of also potential candidates or diverse candidate sourcing platforms. There are so many, and they're growing and growing globally, and they give you access to various different talent from skill sets and locations, but got kind of a bit of a list or ones that we're familiar with ourselves. So JobWell is a large one over in the USA, and Tech Up is specifically for females in diversity in tech, for diversity in tech. And Blendor is a platform I was actually having a look at this morning. And what that does is that is based on algorithms and data, and it matches employers with talent from underrepresented groups, and it's all based on their algorithm and their skill set. And I think that's probably going to be the way that technology is going to evolve too.
Okay, thanks so much.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, so just wanted to go into the next one really, because there's following on from that. Can you share some examples of successful initiatives or programs aimed at fostering diversity in inclusion in recruitment hiring? Have you got any examples you can give us?
Of course. I think, well, if it's okay for us to focus in on some of the work that we've been doing at Source. We've actually launched a platform called Source Talks Community, and various different campaigns, one of them being around women in tech and closing the gap of female professionals working their way through the tech industry or through tech roles in various sectors. And within that, building that community, it's started to grow organically itself. And we're starting to see the power of community marketing and the power of the individuals in that community make it grow and make it happen and get the message more powerful across, if that makes sense. Didn't deliver that well, but it made sense in my head. The power of that is about the referrals and about the connections and about this person connects to this person, to that person, to this person. Before you know it, you've got a global network of talent all on the same journey with the same mindset and the same kind of vision of where they want to be. So that is a really, really, really powerful tool, I would say. Going back to your points, and of course, Nick's point too around training. That's a really key part. Like training is constantly. And if your organization doesn't have that kind of in-house L&D function, there are platforms out there, or there are products, podcasts, media series out there that can provide that base level of training too. And I guess the final one would be partnerships. The opportunity to partner with not-for-profit organisations and look at how you can build that out from an ESG perspective is really key, from also in educating your current workforce, as well as those externally, and improving your processes for the future.
Right. Okay. Well, I can obviously see you're very enthusiastic about women in business, which is great, because I think everyone should be. One of the things I always said is most of the women managers I've had and female managers I've had have all been excellent, actually, at all points in their career. And I'm friends with most of them still now. So, there should be no divide as far as I'm concerned. Moving on very quickly to the next set of questions, really. So, when we're looking at cultivating the company culture and employees making them feel valued and empowered, we know this came out in the Gartner report just recently that we covered in one of our other webinars. So I just wanted to ask you all, really. So I'll start with Michael, because you've not really had much to say so far. So, and I've got you down as another couple of questions. But from your point of view, what are the key components of building an inclusive company culture?
So to make it as simple as possible with that, it's communication. And I know that sounds like quite a cliche answer with a lot of things, but if you haven't got communication, you haven't got collaboration. If you don't have collaboration, you don't have new ideas. If you don't have new ideas, you then start to foster concerns. And then all of a sudden you have people leaving your business. You're not actually creating anything or discussing anything that's meaningful or insightful. And this is taken into like a little topic that I'll come on to when we run through some of the communication ideas within businesses. But some simple things that we started to do actually at SGI. I'm going to bring it back to SGI, because I must say that, as I say, I've been in the industry 15 years, 2 years with SGI. The one thing that I will say that I've absolutely loved about SGI is the way that it's enhanced communication methods. This can be really simple stuff, whether it be Teams, whether it be emails, which is obviously it's taken away that face-to-face element, but it's never meetings for meeting's sake. There's one-to-ones, there's quarterly development meetings, there's yearly development meetings, but all within that, Nick and Rebecca and the team behind them have always tried to enhance our thought process around having questions and topics around our people, and not just talking about work, not just talking about KPIs. How do you get from A to Z? But actually, what do you need to see? What do you need to discuss? What do you need to be motivated by, or what do you experience within the business that's going to enhance your performance? And one thing that I say SGI has been excellent with is embracing that kind of communication.
Right. Well, thanks for that. I'm going to ask the same question to you, Nick, actually. What's your view on that?
I'm going to be really simplistic with this. I think if you break down inclusivity as a culture, what you're really talking about is somewhere where all the employees feel valued, respected, supported, and have equal opportunities, regardless of who they are, right? Now, if you really break that down, that's just good leadership. And I think sometimes we separate out DE&I and inclusivity from actually just incredible leadership. And that's what I'd come back to with it. And I think as a business, we've been great with that. But I think when you look at DE&I data, one of the things that I would ask people to look at when they're trying to drive inclusivity in their businesses, how does this link into the way you promote, the way you manage performance in leadership, the engagement surveys that you do, and actually bring that across? And there's some really interesting stuff. Netflix are quite notorious for having literally published their 360 feedback on all of their managers and made it available on their intranet. And actually, pretty brave thing to do. But if you really want to foster that open, inclusive environment, one of the things is making sure that people can see where it's open and inclusive, where that's driving a real positive engagement with leadership. Like Mike's talking about with the open communication, it's really, really critical. I'm not necessarily inspiring everyone to go out here and just publish all their 360 management feedback. Please don't necessarily do that. It might end up in a lot of trouble. But getting out and making the inclusivity a part of what good leadership is like in your organization, communicating the positives and the negatives of that, really comes back to making it a key part of your business priorities. And I think too often, one of the things that we separate out, we often talk about the business case for DE&I, but it's really making it real for each manager. Does each manager really understand how it's relevant to their problems in their team? It's aligned to their own personal goals to be inclusive in their team. And do we show them that it's working or it's not working? Too often it's always in retrospect, or it's a big period of time, we chuck it at them. If we can business partner really effectively with key senior leaders for them to roll that down, there's that horrible old saying of a fish rots from the head down. Well, it equally can be really positive impact from the top down. And that's what we've got to try and foster, and then engage with everybody through and give the voice to from the very bottom of the business all the way up to make sure that feedback continues, and use that to make decisions about who should and how they should foster and build that culture in a leadership role.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to move on from that. And Rebecca, what's your thoughts?
I'll just keep it short and sweet, and it does definitely connect with kind of Nick and Mike's answers. And it's about focusing in on your employees being almost your biggest brand advocates or your biggest brand strengths, and celebrate them and appreciate them and recognize them. And if you're in an environment that recognizes employee successes at all different levels, we've just said, that's driving that element of appreciation, of we value you as our people, and that will be delivered in an external manner. And that's about building your employer brand around that as well, and focusing your employer brand around the stories of the people that are inside your business and how they've got to where they are, what their journeys are. And you make that raw and authentic and true, that message is delivered externally as well as internally, and it brings that positivity about your business and where you're going with your hiring.
That's great. I mean, obviously we pick that up on our data as well. I mean, we've seen in the last year growth of around 8% of candidates that will literally go and look for culture of the company first when they're looking at a company on their employer branding. And that's across all of our regions and all of our hubs that we run and client sites. So yeah, quite important. Nick, I want to go back to you with a question. really based on what you said earlier, and that is how do leaders at SGI encourage open communication and feedback from their teams? Just give me a quick 5-minute on that one, if you don't mind.
I think one of the things is making feedback regular. I think it's a part of an everyday conversation. If performance management ends up being a once a quarter we look at it and I give you feedback, positive and negative, and it's irregular, the chance of it being biased based on an experience or somebody's viewpoint is much easily swept under the carpet. That regular open communication is really the key. So historically, we've always done that, but it's been less formal. This year, we've gone and rolled out more consistent performance management. We use Bamboo as our platform. And one of the things with that is that the feedback can just be dropped in at any point into somebody's feedback. And equally, the team can ask for feedback before their performance reviews from the whole team to then use for themselves. It doesn't have to just be driven one way with feedback. So I think that's the first thing. We have an employee voice forum, which we use heavily. Now, we're not a big business necessarily in comparison to some of the people that might be here, but the ERG and specific groups that you use in terms of employee resource groups, those are really, really critical. I think the main thing I'd say is it is about creating an environment where anyone can talk up. So we have, and this might sound as simple as it is, a feedback box online and physical where people can come back and drop it in. That is quite literally opened at the end of month meeting with the team and made sure that we go through it. And we open it every month and we go through it, and literally what is in there is discussed, even if it is ridiculous, as long as it's clean. And that transparency of communication means that we make sure that these things are talked about, they aren't hidden away from, whether that's I literally hate my desk is terribly placed, the heating needs to be hotter, whatever, it's covered in team meetings, everyone knows where they stand. And then as long as the action's done on it, it doesn't matter. And if it's not, then we come back and we address it and we say, why not? So then it's clear.
Okay. And then finally ended up with Mike, really. A final word on that from your point of view, because I know that you're quite an advocate. So what's your final view?
Absolutely. Yeah, so with that is, so throughout kind of my whole tenure, I've always just tried to keep it as simple as possible, right? So I'm going to just repeat the question again, but how do leaders at recruitment companies encourage open communication? So I mentioned earlier, it's that communication piece. It's leading by example, and that sounds kind of cliche, but leaders should model open communication by actively listening to their members, soliciting feedback, being transparent in their communication. No one wants to hear like a Mr. Positive all the time. When the chips are down, your team want to hear what you're doing and bring a solution to the table as well. And I think that when that part gets missed, you're all of a sudden in the trenches with them, but not actually leading by any kind of clear example. I went through briefly like the communication channels with it, and Nick mentioned briefly on it as well about the suggestion box type of things. But what's that kind of links into that quite heavily is that kind of safe environment that you can create, that you can foster within a culture. And I don't mean safe environment as in like not going to get told off or things like that, but it's if you have a good relationship with your team and you are creating that kind of real culture, they want to be able to express their opinions, they want to be able to express their ideas, they want to be able to express their concerns without kind of fear of reprisal. So all that does is just encouraging respectful and constructive feedback, and if you're not getting feedback, then you can't grow as an individual, as a leader, without it. So it works really like hand in hand essentially. There's other areas such as like the training, it's providing effective communication. There are different training that you can get. It's a really hard area to talk about when it comes to training within leadership. It's often kind of got a bit of a grey space, but you can get training on active listening. You can do some really cool training on conflict resolution. It's giving and receiving feedback. How, like, you can be trained on how to receive that, how to equip then the team members with the information that you're gaining and that you're gathering. It's enhancing team culture as well with collaboration as well. So I briefly touched on that point. So I think whatever team size, whatever company size you are, whether you're a 3-person team or a 35-person team. You can create any form of collaboration, whether it be supporting on cross-functional projects or team building activities, opportunities for just peer-to-peer learning. That's I'm a huge advocate of the peer-to-peer learning side, because you can get one guy that comes into your team who's been doing the job for 6 months, and you could have another woman who's been in your team for 6 years, and they can learn something off of each other. And that's just peer-to-peer and encouraging that communication. But what I'll kind of resound this out on is my kind of number one tip with that is acting on the feedback that you get. If you're receiving all of this fantastic information and that information just sits there, you're not working on it, you're going to lose credibility as a leader, as a promoter within the business. Evolve it, learn from it. That'll improve you, it'll improve the business, and it's just a continuous pattern, really. It's a complete circle that you constantly have to try and drive around, especially in this new evolving world of DE&I.
Okay, well, just as a bit of a curveball then, really, based on something you just said, which is something that I've picked up on with a lot of clients recently, is younger people, because they've not been in the office environment, they don't have the same sort of access to people that they used to. How do you, or what can you do to help them with conflict resolution? Because they've not had any training on it, they've not had any experience of it, because they've not been in an office to do it, and they become the quiet group, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It's a tough one, actually, Vincent, because when you look at it in that respect, so you're bringing people into your business who are like real rookies. They might have just finished university, they might have just finished college, they might have come straight from school and getting into work. Everything that they've learned really about conflict resolution within the workplace is probably just from a book or from a preconceived idea they already have from watching some like TV or something like that. The one thing that you kind of have to do, I believe, as a leader, is it's never easy to train someone who has never experienced those kind of life skills. And if you're fearful of kind of breaking that mold and having some of those difficult conversations, they learn from your communication. It's not something, I don't believe it's something you can kind of sit down in a classroom and say, this is conflict resolution, or this is how you can gain and provide constructive feedback. They learn from their leader, from their manager. I mean, that's how I learned, essentially. Anyway, you experience different things on the workplace, but if you haven't got a leader or a manager that can pull you to one side, a good one-to-one, real kind of constructive feedback, this is how I think you should do things in the future, that's how you're going to learn and kind of create your own feel to it as well, and have your own spin on things, because otherwise you just kind of become an AI robot in all of it, I guess.
Absolutely. No, that's a good answer, though. Thanks for that. So I'm just going to go on to one more before we open this up to some of the open questions. So Nick, what strategies can be used to cultivate diverse talent pipelines for future leadership positions?
Okay, so I feel like that almost feeds directly off the question that Mike's just answered. And actually, I think it links back to everything we spoke about, which is great. One of the things I'd say is, first of all, are you attracting diverse talent into the business? Has to be a key starter point. If you don't have diverse talent in the first place, then you're not going to be able to foster that pipeline. But to link into a couple of elements with that, just very quickly again, Rebecca was talking about the engagement that you can get and using your employees, the existing staff, to actually be your voice externally. I think that's really, really critical. Often as recruiters, one of the things that we're primarily doing is networking within the groups of people that we know our clients are going to want to hire and bring on board. And that's why you use a niche provider, is to get somebody who can provide the candidates you aren't always talking to. I think that needs to be a key focus if you want to foster future diversity in your own business, is, are you talking and engaging with those people externally on an ongoing conversation? Especially the young, diverse groups, are they hanging out in places online, physically, that you can go and engage with them and create voice? Partly because I think often when we look at this, it's about hiring. It's also about the fact that those people, when they may look at your business or look at a leadership role, may not automatically think they would fit that position if they look at it and they don't see anybody like them. And if you are able to make it more appealing and more accessible by making it something that is achievable, that will help you create that diverse succession planning. I think the other part is, again, I spoke about linking your DE&I into your engagement survey or your 360 feedback is, are you building it into your succession planning? Not how diverse is the team now or how diverse was it before, but actually with the upcoming future leaders in the team, do I have some diversity in this team? If I do not, how can I look at creating that? And how do I look at that as a big business and a little business? And in this change that we want to go through in building diverse teams, I think one of the key things for anybody in the HR, the L&D side, the TA side is that ability to look big picture and small picture and jump between really quickly and engage managers in that conversation about the future by being able to look at what's going on in that business, what's the relevant problems, and linking that into the succession planning. So I think when it comes to succession planning conversations, that's definitely a part of it. I think the other part, and the element that links into what Mike's just been talking about when it comes to communication, and ironically, particularly with young people coming into the workplace who maybe not have that conflict management, is how do we develop managers into their roles? Often management programs, one of the biggest problems we have with inclusivity is they may end up being huge, big commitments of time and resource when they are in a role that requires a lot of time and resource already, and they aren't given the time to actually learn the skills properly to be able to do the role well. They might be in a situation whereby it's taking them away from their flexible working, because management development often does need more face-to-face time, learning from peers, sharing ideas. So I would suggest that people take a real look at how their management development comes through in their business. Does the actual program itself that develops your managers put people off coming into it? And one of the biggest things for me that I think is really, really useful is the coaching side. And I think to Mike's answer that he gave you around that conflict management, the biggest thing that any business I think can do around engaging young people in things like conflict management, encouraging people to take their own action, is helping them decide how to take that action through coaching. And if you can do that, one of the things you can do is create coaches and mentors to inspire those who may not automatically see themselves as future leaders to take on the role, to gain the experience and to step through in that talent pipelining. Too often we go, we don't have any leaders, but we've not put them in the scenarios or given them the support to be seen as potential future leaders. And if we can create that through consistent coaching and engagement, that's how you're going to build that talent pipeline. And too often, if you are the minority in a room, you may not feel the most confident to say what you think in a room. And we need to avoid that situation where it's the loudest person who speaks who gets seen as the leader or the future leader when it comes to talent pipelining. And that's about coaching, encouragement, support, and mentorship, and then making sure that we have an inclusive program to bring them through so that they can develop the skills they need.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Nick. That I think that resonates with almost everybody here. I'd also like to just add to that the average time that anyone who's a millennial or below spends in a company at the moment is about 2 years, 9 months. So retention is a big issue. Maybe this is all part of that. You know, we need to manage people better and give them a voice, which I think is probably a good idea. Simon, can we just move on to any questions that have come in since we started talking?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a couple of questions in the bank here, but if anyone does have a question they'd like to put to the panel, now is a good time to get typing. So the first question's come in. I've had to translate it just a little bit, so I'll keep it as plain as I can. This is in the context of building diverse and multinational teams. What open data source would you agree is used by candidates to benchmark their salary expectations when it comes to comparing locations globally for an organization? The example here is, should they be offered the same in real money as someone working in the US when they work in Europe?
Anyone want to answer that one?
I'll jump in. Yeah. Sorry, Bex, go on. I'll jump in straight after.
So in terms of open source, I I guess something like GitHub, for example. You can probably find, well, that's from a tech perspective, of course, but GitHub within the repositories there would have access. Something that jumps to mind for me would be something like Glassdoor as well, which does obviously have that global coverage, and Glassdoor is the candidate-driven platform. It is not driven by the employers, which again is going back to our previous points. In terms of other kind of global platforms, that's as much as I could provide there. So handing over to Mike.
Yeah, so there's this other one that I use called Numbeo, which is a really cool open source platform, and it's actually the data is derived from candidates within different locations. So I'm just kind of perceiving the question that was asked, but if it was someone based in Romania and they're working on like a B2B contract from from a business in the US, then you could quite easily just add in your locations and understand what the different costs of livings are, whether that be to groceries, to rent, whatever it may be. It gives a really good enhanced view, but it's the people that are based on the ground that are living there that's adapting those. But that's kind of what I gained from that question.
Yeah, someone's also
helps.
put in the chat that there's no direct comparison from country to country due to differences in tax, cost of living, etc. There's no real tools that will break that down.
Maybe there will be in the future with AI. Who knows?
Okay.
Maybe.
If you're working with a recruiter, ask the recruiter as well. Ask them to provide that information to you, because that they will have various resources that they have from their current customers, and they can provide some insight for you there. Use them as that human point in contact than just jumping straight into the tools.
Okay,
definitely.
Simon, because of time, on the final question.
Yeah, we do. We've got a really good one here. How are companies being advised on recruitment processes when they work with external partners, so recruitment companies, etc.? For some neurodiverse individuals, the typical interview process and entire recruitment process can put them at a disadvantage. They haven't come across many recruitment agencies that recommend improvements. So anyone got anything they'd like to pop into that one?
I'm going to give quite this is just my viewpoint with this, but if that's the case, if you are having those challenges with a recruitment company where they're not kind of discussing interview processes with their businesses, I don't think you're working with the right recruitment businesses. I'm just being quite frank there. If someone does have those kind of neurodiverse challenges or needs that any additional support or needs communication conveyed between them and your client, that's actually quite a simple thing to do, as long as you have good relationships with your partners and with your candidates. That it strikes to me that maybe those that particular example, they don't have a strong enough relationship with their recruiter, because unfortunately recruiters often do just get seen as like a middleman of just passing over data. That's not the case at all. We are here to kind of enhance the candidate's process and to enhance the client's process. We should be able to gather enough feedback and data to actually support why we're trying to provide advice to our client to adapt their interview process, or to make it better, or to make it more sustainable for someone within the process who might not have the same opportunity or have the same ease of access.
If I can jump on that as well, Mike, I think one of the challenges with this is that question actually covers so much.
Yes.
Without knowing the specific neurodivergent element that comes into it, I think the key thing I would say is, if there's a recruiter out there who is intentionally making a recruitment process not inclusive from a neurodivergent perspective, I'd be surprised. I think what often happens is, as individuals, we reach out in the best way that we think best to engage with people. We have a conversation. If there are accommodations that are needed in a process, talk to your recruiter. Talk to the internal recruiter at the business you're working at. Certainly, from a business perspective for us, if there are elements with that we need to educate a client with, challenge them on, or look at adaptations to an interview process, we'll happily go and do it. And I think you're right. There's more education in this. There's a lot of education in so many areas of inclusivity, where in every element. In one category, every person watching this call will be ignorant to one thing. And I think neurodivergency, certainly for us in the tech sector, is one that we are and need to continue to look at how we can do, because probably statistically there is a higher level of neurodivergency in the tech specialist roles than there might be in other areas. And I think we're evolving as a business, but I think that real acknowledgement of neurodivergence is probably not been caught up with by the interview process and the practices yet. And I think it's fair to say that. What my big question would be is, have you reached out and explained what you would like preferably and how that can work, and find a medium with the recruiter that you're partnering with, just like Mike said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
There was something that.
Sorry, Simon. We're actually out of time. So I think there was a couple of things that came back out of that. Otherwise, I think we should wind up now.
Sure, no problem at all. That is everything. Someone has commented that it depends on how open the candidate is being about neurodivergency and the accommodations that they require. So it is kind of case by case. It would seem. I think the thing to go back to, one of Rebecca's very first statements was, when you talk about the interview process, you mentioned jumping on a call. Immediately, you're putting someone out when you do that. That's not going to be applicable to absolutely every candidate. So it is a bigger issue, and perhaps something that we should come back and address in its own right if there's an appetite for it. I'd be more than happy to do that. But for now, that's everything. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you to SGI for lending your expertise to this webinar. I think we're all going to leave a lot smarter. And if anyone here is looking at redoing their DE&I and doing things a little bit differently, I'd encourage you to reach out to the panel directly, and perhaps they can talk you through what you need to do differently and help you on that journey. If anyone wants a copy of the recording, they can email us at sales@PharmiWeb.com. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you.